After the starter had been cleared away, the king rose to give a short speech. "My fellow Cragflingers, welcome to my humble palace. Tonight is a special occasion. It is the Feast of the Cragflingers. In 2 weeks' time, at the Arena building, we shall be enjoying a grand tradition of Gud, the Royal Tournament. I am pleased to welcome you all, and I salute your splendid beasts." The hairy crags stopped munching and lifted their tiny heads as applause rang out. The king continued, proudly introducing his new Royal Cragflinger. Splidge stood up, and his crag came bounding across the room, eager to be the centre of attention. The orange mop leapt into the boy's hands, and everyone cheered as they both took a bow. Apart from the Baron, who still shot spine-chilling glances everywhere, the other competitors seemed to be quite a friendly bunch. "Before the main dish is served," the king went on, "it is the turn of the challengers to introduce themselves." One by one, the visitors, each sounding confident and, to Splidge's dismay, highly experienced, stood and gave their name and the town or village from where they hailed. "I am Hades," said a fit, bronzed, aristocratic gentleman. "I am from the Isle of Gid." Splidge had heard of this place. Pirates and buccaneers terrorised the islands and plagued the shipping lanes, so the rumours went. It was also the only place in Gud where it didn't rain. Hades' crag trotted across the marble floor to his feet, and he held it aloft. When everyone had seen his splendid, bright red mop creature, he pulled out its nose, whizzed it above his head, and sent it flying across the room. It splattered on the wall and stuck for a moment before dropping to the ground, apparently none the worse for wear. Hades bowed graciously and sat down. The Cragflingers applauded vigorously, and a murmur of complimentary utterances wafted over the table regarding the skill and finesse, although many comments were about how tanned he was and how lucky he was to live in a place with continual sunshine. The next Cragflinger flounced out of his chair with an air of theatricality. He was a lot more flamboyant than Hades. "Hello. My name's Clonk, and I'm here from the delightful village of Guddington, where all the beautiful people live." His voice was high-pitched and sounded a bit girly, and his movements were effeminate and fluid. "Oh, I've been a Cragflinger for nearly 7 years, and I love it. Throwing these divine little creatures at walls gives me immense pleasure, as I know it does them. Sometimes people are shocked when they hear what I do and accuse me of cruelty to animals, but they are ignoramuses." Clonk pranced around the table, savouring the attention. "May I say just how excited I am about the tournament and to be battling against the new Royal Cragflinger?" He gave Splidge a vigorous wave, puckering his lips, and blew a kiss. "Hello, Petal." "Oh, for goodness sake," hissed the Baron. "Get on with it, Clonk." Clonk stared at the Baron while tossing his head as if trying to get an imaginary hair out of his eyes, and then peered down his nose. "Oh, do shut up, Frogmorton. You've had your turn. You don't frighten me with your sneering bravado." The Baron jumped to his feet, eyes ablaze, but the king banged on the table with his goblet and motioned for him to sit. "Please proceed, Clonk." "Thank you, Your Royal Guddiness. I want to introduce you to my crag, Pom-Pom." He slapped his thigh, and his pink, fluffy crag trotted over to him. Its hair had been neatly combed and smelt of strong floral perfume. Clonk scooped it up, but the animal slipped and fell into a tub of gooseberry jam, shooting dollops of the sticky stuff all over the place. As the critter kicked its tiny legs, a large splodge of jellied fruit flew up and hit the Baron in the face. The Cragflingers fell about laughing, and the indignant icy glare from the reptilian man only made the situation funnier. Clonk retrieved his crag and, with a deceptive easy flick of the wrist, tossed the jam-covered beast over his shoulder. It flew as gracefully as a hairy jelly ball could and smacked onto the wall. The other competitors clapped and cheered, impressed by Clonk's wonderful recovery. Splidge found this all rather amusing and turned to watch the next character, who hastily leapt from his feet. It was the podgy youth. His name was Blimp, and he came from the north. His crag was a brown, dull-looking thing, which appeared to be half asleep. It was presented like the previous crags, and then, shockingly, the boy shoved the thing into his cavernous mouth. He held it there for a moment, clamped between his yellowing teeth, with the creature's legs kicking and flapping for all it was worth. Then, with a phut sound, the fat boy spat the thing a couple of feet into the air, and when it came down he head-butted it over the table, and it landed on the wall directly behind Splidge. Clapping ensued, and Blimp bowed smugly before returning to his seat. This ritual went on round the table, each rival Cragflinger showing off their animal companions and sending them whizzing to various walls of the throne room. Everyone had a unique style or quirky technique. The only member of the party who didn't bother to present a demonstration was Baron Throgmorton. He merely stood when it was his turn, bowed in his peculiar door-hinge manner, and explained that he had no desire to give away any of his crag-flinging secrets, and promptly slithered back into his chair. As his crag wasn't in the room, and no one wanted to see the gruesome monster released from its cage, the matter passed unchallenged. It was time for the feast to continue. Although there were cold meats, cheeses, and delicious-looking salads already laid out on the table, Splidge was impressed when a couple of roasted pig heads were brought out on wooden platters. "They look disgusting," squirmed Freckles, as she placed them on the table. "What's all that slime covering them, Luce?" Lucy Longtrousers, who wasn't the slightest bit squeamish, laughed. "You are silly, Frex. It's only honey. It makes me want to vomit. And to think you work in a butcher's shop," chuckled Lucy Longtrousers. Large pots of frothy, dark brown liquid were brought to the table. Everyone was thirsty and soon calling for second helpings. The Baron was puzzled. He didn't recognise the alcoholic brew. "Brother," he called, interrupting the king, who was engaged in conversation with Clonk. "This ale has been tampered with." "For the better," someone cried. "Hear, hear," said another. The king smiled. "What brings you to that conclusion, Giles? It tastes excellent to me." The Baron scowled. "This is not Baron's bitter." "True," agreed the king, "but I fear it makes the Baron bitter." Ignoring the pun, the Baron raised his voice. "May I ask from whence it came? Have I not the only licence to brew beer in Gud? Calm yourself, Giles. It's a special brew produced solely for tonight's festivities." The Baron angrily slammed his fist down on the table. "And you didn't think to consult me?" "No, Giles, I did not. Your beer is—" "Awful!" someone shouted. "Popular," continued the king tactfully. "But tonight I wanted something different, something special, that's all." Colour seeped into the normally white, cadaverous face of Baron Throgmorton. He was fuming. He stood up in a rage, knocking back his chair so violently that it flew across the room. "You shall regret this, brother." He glared at the dumbfounded Cragflingers. "Drink this muck if you will, but be warned. It is nothing but rat poison." To everyone's surprise, he spun on his heel and stormed out of the throne room. "Good riddance to him," said Clonk. "Hear, hear," cheered Blimp. Hades clapped his hands. "I, for one, would like some more of that rat poison." "Me too," said another, and soon all the flagons were being banged on the table for speedy refills. Freckles and Lucy Longtrousers were rushed off their feet. Splidge joined in with the frivolity, demanding more beer, much to the annoyance of the two girls. Once all the drinking vessels had been refilled, Hades stood up and held his flagon aloft. "Your Royal Guddiness, may I inquire who is responsible for supplying this wonderful beer, which I think we all agree is vastly superior to the drivel our friend the Baron cooks up in his sweat-box of a brewery?" The king merely giggled. "Tubby Drake is the admirable fellow, the landlord of the Hog and Bucket. Then I propose a toast to the admirable Tubby Drake and to the Royal Tournament." "Hear, hear," everyone cried in unison. "To Tubby Drake and the Royal Tournament." There was much clinking of flagons and guzzling of beer. Even the Crags were permitted bowlfuls of the strong drink. It was heady stuff, and Splidge could feel its potency travelling rapidly through his veins. He'd never been a beer drinker before, but now that he was 12, he could consume as much as he liked. He had tried Baron's Bitter once before, and found it flat, tasting of boiled hedgehog and stinging nettles. It was extremely tame compared to this new brew, so he banged on the table and called for more. After all the food had been eaten and the plates were cleared away, the helpers were allowed to go home. Snotty crawled down from the rafters and joined Freckles and Lucy Longtrousers on the landing. "I suppose they'll be partying all night long," Snotty said, jealous that he hadn't been invited. "Probably," said Freckles. "Lucky them. Groggins has a doggy bag for us all to take home, so we'll have to make do with that," said Lucy Longtrousers. "I'm starving," claimed the soot-covered boy, and he rushed downstairs to the kitchen in search of his food parcel. As the evening progressed, singing broke out, and voices were raised. Hades played a peculiar musical instrument, a bit like a flute, with a gourd stuck on the end. Others got up and started to dance. More beer was consumed, and Splidge felt woozy. The throne room started to spin. The noise, dancing and flickering candles began to play havoc with his vision. The king grew extra arms and legs. The Lady Cragflinger next to him sprouted 2 heads, and tongues seemed to dart in and out like spitting snakes. Blimp was sitting on the table in a vat of wobbly green jelly and produced smelly puffs of wind from his bottom. A wave of exhaustion engulfed Splidge, and he just wanted to sleep. Through half-shut eyes, he noticed that the others had begun to fall asleep. He couldn't work out who it was, but one of them lay sprawled on the floor with their arms and legs splayed out. Many of the mini-beasts had curled into tiny balls and were snoring their heads off. Splidge's own crag had rolled under the king's throne and was fully engaged in dreamland. "I think I need a glass of water," stammered Splidge. "My head is befuddled." All he could find on the table was a pot of cold coffee. He poured himself a cupful and gulped it down. Splidge tried to stand, but his legs were too weak. He sunk to the marble floor and started to crawl away from the table like a baby. His limbs were heavy, and he didn't know what had come over him. He'd never experienced anything like this before. Then he recalled the Baron's parting words. "Drink it if you like, but it's rat poison." Everyone had laughed and made a joke about it, but what if it was true? What if they had all been poisoned? Where was Groggins? He knew that the royal butler would be able to help, if he could only find the old man and get a glass of water. Navigating his way to the landing was too difficult, so Splidge slumped in a corner and wedged himself between 2 giant ornamental vases to sleep it off. Just as sleep began to consume him, he was aware of people coming into the room. Perhaps they could help him. Splidge tried to call out to them, but all he could manage was a hoarse whisper. The newcomers strode past him, oblivious of his presence. Splidge tried to wave, but he had no control over his arms. His limbs were useless and inert, and he felt frustrated and incredibly tired. Splidge closed his eyes, and within seconds he was lost in his dreams. They featured the beautiful leather-clad girl with the raven-coloured hair. Mistress Doreen, the Baron's daughter, was lovely. No, he mustn't think of her. He mustn't look at her. But he couldn't get her out of his mind. It was so vivid. It was as if she was there in front of him, and he felt that he could actually reach out and touch her, kiss her even. He puckered his lips, leant forward, and gave the girl a long, tender kiss. Splidge opened his eyes and saw Mistress Doreen really was leaning over him. "Oh!" He reached out to touch her. "I'm not dreaming, am I?" The coffee must have done the trick, for his head was no longer spinning. Mistress Doreen smiled at the boy, then turned and vanished in a puff of smoke. Smoke? Where did that come from? Splidge sat up. The room was blurred, but he could see a bright light in the centre of the banqueting table and black figures moving around it. They weren't the merry competitors Splidge had been feasting with earlier, so who were they? The big fellow with the piggy eyes looked familiar. Splidge jolted back to reality as the smell of burning wafted in his direction and flames shot up to the ceiling. The banqueting table was on fire. Pigface was pouring liquid from a large metal container, and at first Splidge thought he was trying to douse the flames with water, but the substance ignited with a huge flash. The heat was intense. Feeling an icy chill ripple down his spine, Splidge spotted the sinister figure of Baron Throgmorton striding around, barking orders. They were setting fire to the palace. At the far end of the room, Mistress Doreen emerged from the black smoke, with the caged crag in her hands. Splidge went to call to her, but the smoke engulfed her again, and when it cleared, she had gone. The throne room doors suddenly flew open, and 2 henchmen stormed in, dragging something between them. Groggins. The old retainer was unconscious and had a nasty bruise on his head. The men pulled him to a chair and unceremoniously dumped him in it. Splidge had seen enough. He clambered to his feet and rushed over to the men and thumped one of them hard on the back. "Hey, what are you doing?" The man turned and glared at the boy. The thug had a horrible scar on his left cheek. He didn't say anything, but clenched his fist and smashed Splidge straight in the face, sending him reeling to the floor. Dazed, Splidge got up. Scarface was brandishing a silver candlestick, like an axe. The bully swiped at the boy, and Splidge ducked. The other henchman grabbed the young Cragflinger by his lapels, lifting him off the ground, and threw him onto the blazing table. Splidge whizzed through the flames and crashed to the floor on the other side. By now, the room was clogged with smoke. Splidge could hardly breathe and found it difficult to see. Determined to help Groggins, Splidge waded blindly through the thick fog and ploughed straight into someone. The Baron! They both froze, surprised to see one another. The brewer was the quickest to react, and grabbing a carving knife from a nearby table, he thrust it against the boy's throat. "I wouldn't move if I were you," he hissed. It wouldn't be long until the whole room was a blazing inferno. The curtains were alight, along with most of the furniture, yet the Baron didn't seem to be in a hurry to leave. "You are an irritating boy. You were warned not to take the job as Royal Cragflinger, but you didn't listen. You have got yourself mixed up with things you do not understand, and you should have left when you had the chance. So you only have yourself to blame. Of course, I would like to have competed against you in the tournament, but I prefer the odds to be in my favour." Pigface emerged out of the billowing smoke, his ugly form lit by the fire's reddish glow. He still clutched the metal container. "Take off your coat, boy," the Baron ordered, jabbing the tip of the knife harder into the boy's neck. Splidge pulled his arms out of the frock coat, and the Baron snatched it from him, gazing lovingly at it for a split second before tossing it safely to one side, away from the flames. The Baron nodded to Pigface, and without hesitation the bully lifted the container of inflammable liquid above Splidge's head and poured the oily contents over him. "Oh dear, you seem to be soaking wet," smirked the tall, thin man, as he withdrew the blade. "You need something to help dry you off," he said, reaching down, and picked up a smouldering chair leg. "I think it's time to say goodbye." One touch with the burning wood, and the boy would suffer a painful and grisly death. Splidge braced himself, when a missile came from nowhere and smacked Pigface hard in the eye, and at the same moment the Baron was smothered in froth and bubbles. A second later, a hand, clasping a green bottle, swiped at the soaking brewer and missed. The Baron stabbed his blade at the mysterious assailant, while Pigface, clutching his eye socket, howled in agony. Taking the opportunity to escape, Splidge dived to the floor and rolled into the swirling smoke. The fire was raging all around them. There was a loud crack from above, and a large chunk of wood came crashing down, narrowly missing the Baron. He realised it was time to leave. On the way out, the brewer reached for the frock coat, but the valuable garment was no longer where he had thrown it. Splidge felt a hand on his shoulder, and he lashed out. "Hey!" The voice was familiar. "Pour this over you before you spontaneously combust." Splidge felt a bottle thrust into his hands, and he tipped the contents over him. It smelt sweet. "It's champagne," Snotty grinned. "Take my hand and follow me to the sideboard." In the murky orange glow and the searing heat, the two boys groped their way to the far side of the room where the smoke was thinner. "Am I glad to see you?" gasped the Royal Cragflinger. Flames were shooting up to the roof, licking the old wooden beams. The unconscious bodies of the Cragflingers were scattered around the room. Some of the Crags were running around in circles, coughing horribly, while others cowered in the corner, scared rigid and shaking like crazy. "Grab the bottles and aim them at the flames," Snotty called out. "We can use the champagne to put out the fire." "We'll never do it. There isn't enough," said Splidge. "Wait, I have a better idea. Shoot the corks at the roof." "What?" "Look, I'll show you." Reaching into the sideboard, Splidge grabbed a champagne bottle and pushed his thumb under the cork. With a loud pop, the cork shot into the air like a bullet, smashing into the weak plaster above. Snotty grinned, getting the idea, and they both grabbed another bottle. Again and again the mini rockets hammered into the ceiling, obliterating the plaster and piercing holes in the roof. The boys wanted the roof to leak like it had never leaked before, and they fired every champagne cork they could find at it. Water started to trickle in, and before long, rain was gushing down into the throne room. The smoke cleared, and the crackling of burning timbers turned into the sizzling of dying embers. The force of nature turned the inferno into a whimpering, pathetic hiss. "Let it rain! Let it pour! Thank Guddiness, it always rains in the land of Gud!" laughed the two boys, dancing in the downpour. Splidge rushed over to the throne room and extracted his furry friend from underneath. The Crag was still fast asleep, safe and sound. Groggins and the other Cragflingers were beginning to wake up. The cold rainwater splashing onto their faces slowly brought them round. Bleary-eyed, they sat up and surveyed the room, oblivious of what had happened. Groggins nursed his sore head. Splidge and Snotty grinned at each other. It had been exciting. "I thought you had gone home when all the staff left," said Splidge. "I had, but it was the smoke that gave it away," explained Snotty. "I was crossing the drawbridge, munching the nosh old Groggins had given us, when I saw white stuff billowing out of the roof. I thought to myself, that's not right, so I came back. When I saw what the Baron was up to, I fired a champagne cork at him. God, he was angry. Oh, hang on a minute, I forgot something." Snotty went to the landing and returned with something under his arm. He handed Splidge the golden frock coat. "When the Baron flung it, I grabbed it. He never knew I was there 'cause of all the smoke." "Well done, Snotty," cheered Splidge. "It's a pity the Baron and all his men escaped. I'm sure the King would like them locked up." Groggins stood beside the charred remains of the banqueting table and threw up his hands with concern. "Talking of the royal Gud, I don't suppose anyone noticed what's happened to the King?" A whip cracked savagely, and the horses galloped as fast as they could. The carriage clattered noisily through the dark city streets, churning up mud and disturbing the peace. Pigface lashed the animals for the umpteenth time, trying to make them go quicker. The Baron and his two henchmen, one with a scar and the other with a ponytail, were squashed up inside the carriage, watching over a fat man dressed in official regalia, sleeping like a baby. The tattooed Crag growled in its cage. "Is there any way to shut that thing up?" barked the Baron. "I think it's hungry, Baron," sneered Scarface, poking the creature with a stick. "Well, don't provoke it, you fool!" The Baron was pressed against the window and unable to get comfortable with the colossal passenger wedged in next to him. "The girl?" he asked. "Did anyone see where she went?" "Sorry, Baron. We were busy setting fire to the place like you told us." "Indeed, but she seems to have run away. She is a liability, that girl, and needs to be taught a lesson." The two henchmen exchanged glances. In the past, the heavies had heard screams coming from the girl's window, and her makeup hadn't covered the bruises and black eyes that mysteriously appeared after meetings with her father. Scarface knew only too well the kind of lesson the Baron gave, and he ran a finger along the wound on his cheek. "She is too headstrong and independent. I even caught her taking more than a passing interest in that nuisance boy," the Baron said. The carriage came to a halt adjacent to a pair of large wrought-iron gates. The street was in near darkness. Evidently the lamplighter had been absent from his duties. The Baron handed a key to Scarface. "Dump him somewhere in there," he ordered, as he slipped a small scrap of paper into the large man's pocket. With Herculean effort, the men hauled their sleeping passenger out of the carriage. Scarface unlocked the padlock, and together with Ponytail they dragged the unconscious man through the gates. "Just a minute," the Baron called. He stooped down and picked up an object that had fallen from the man's head. It was a wooden crown, painted gold, with imitation jewels.